So now that we have gone ahead, installed our project, had a look through the actual folder structure and the files, what we'll do next is talk about this script tag. Now, you may have used a script tag before. If you're brand new to JavaScript, then you may not have encountered a script tag, but essentially it's an HTML element that defines somewhere where we're going to write some JavaScript. Now, JavaScript can be served from our particular server, or it could be hosted elsewhere, such as a Google API, for example, which means that we can write our own JavaScript, or perhaps we could include JavaScript from elsewhere on the internet. So for this, we will dive into our index.html. Now, first things first, if you've had a look through this and already viewed the source code of our page over here, you may have noticed that we have a magical script tag which has been dynamically added to the footer of our page. Now, this is actually something that Webpack is doing for us. This is a far easier and better setup, and Webpack is essentially handling all of our JavaScript files. Now, we only have one of them at the moment, but in future we'll have more. We'll have multiple files, and they will then be bundled into this main.bundle file. So you can see over here that we have no script tag. However, Webpack has injected it for us here with our server. So that's just something that we need to know. Now, what we're going to do is ignore all of that and pretend that we haven't seen it and talk about the script tag from the beginning. Now, you can put the script tag pretty much anywhere that you want to. You can put the script tag inside the head. And what we can say inside, we could go ahead and just do a quick console log, and we'll say hello world. So I'll save this out. Now, if you're new to the browser or web programming in general, then you'll be introduced to something called the developer tools. Now, down in here, I have this inspect. So if you want to go ahead and inspect anywhere on this page, you should be able to see this console depending on which browser you're using. Now, most of these browsers that we use nowadays, thankfully, have all of these developer tools built in for us. So go ahead to your console, as we'll be primarily using this throughout the duration of this course. So here you can see that I have this hello world, and we also have another message printed from our Webpack development server, WDS, saying that live reloading is enabled. So let's actually just demonstrate this. We'll go ahead and hit save, and you can see that that's nicely and quickly just refreshed the JavaScript. So you can see how in this course we're going to be nice and productive and make things reload very quickly on the fly. So anyway, back to this script tag that we want to discuss. You can see here that I'm just simply talking to this console here, and I'm just simply logging a string out, which we'll learn about, and we're using this hello world as a value. Now, a script tag can either be written as follows, so we can have script. However, when we viewed the source of this momentarily, a moment ago, we actually had something like this. We had text/JavaScript. So let's go ahead and save this, and as you can see, we have hello world. Now, the interesting piece is if I went and spelled something wrong, we don't actually get anything here. So what this does is that it tells the browser that this is a different type of script tag that is not text/JavaScript, because here we've intentionally spelt something wrong, and the browser will say, okay, that's not a valid JavaScript type, so I'm not going to execute the code. And you can see here that VS Code is picking up on this. It's made the entire statement white because it knows it's not valid JavaScript, which is actually quite clever. So we'll put this back to usual, we'll hit save, and then we get our hello world back. So that's how we would typically write our JavaScript, and you can imagine that we have 1,000 lines in here as we continue through perhaps a project, and putting everything inside one file isn't probably the best idea. So this is where we introduce something called the source attribute. So what we would say is src, and for example, we could go ahead and point to our source and then index.js. Now, this is called an external file because it doesn't necessarily live in between these script tags. Now, we won't go ahead and save this because this will mess things up because we're using Webpack to generate this file for us. But essentially, if you want to include a JavaScript file that we've written, for example, inside of here, we have this index.js, which we can then reference inside of here. Now, the other good thing is that with the addition of HTML5 a few years ago, they actually made this type attribute fully optional. So we can go ahead and delete that, And essentially, if we want to leave it off, it's the same thing as text/JavaScript. So if we want to leave it, and it's my preference as well, just to leave things nice and clean. Now, it's typical that we would put this on one line as well. Now, a typical JavaScript project may have many files, and it becomes quite tiresome to keep adding these script declarations to this HTML file every time we add a new one. And JavaScript also has some funny quirks, such as the order of execution is very important. So Webpack, thankfully, and the introduction of module systems in JavaScript, which we'll learn about as we continue through the course, make this far easier. And that is exactly why inside of here, when we go ahead and view source again, is we have this main.bundle. So when we have many of these JavaScript files, they're all bundled up and put into one single file in an order that they can all talk to each other, which isn't going to cause us any runtime errors. So this is really handy, and you can see how this is almost considered the older way of doing things. And with the recent addition of Webpack, for example, to a web development stack environment, we are again modernizing our workflows. So with that in mind, let's continue giving you some further information about these script tags. Now, one thing that you may have noticed as well is that we're actually including this inside our head. Now, the head is an HTML element, and things like divs and headers and spans and p tags, they all live inside our body. Now, it's typical that our JavaScript tends to talk to perhaps a DOM node, such as our div-id equals app, and this would actually execute before this page has been parsed and rendered by the browser. So what we would tend to do here is move our script tag down to the bottom of the page. Now, this would always typically sit straight before this closing body tag, and you can see that where Webpack has dynamically injected this, it's done exactly the same thing. So in this video, we've talked about the script tag, we've talked about how to write JavaScript in between those tags, and also the better pattern of using some kind of source file, an external file, which would live in here, for example. And we've now understood that Webpack is doing these things behind the scenes for us. So with that in mind, we can go ahead and I'll reset this back to just a generic script tag, because in the next few videos, I want to just stay inside this mindset and show you how our variables work. And variables are the main building block of building JavaScript applications and how we reference things in our programs. So for a moment, let's consider that somebody doesn't have JavaScript enabled, and we can mimic this by going to our Chrome DevTools settings. I'll scroll down here, and somewhere down in our debugger, we have this disable JavaScript. Now, if I go ahead and press save, we can close this settings off, give the page a refresh. You'll see something quite interesting. Our JavaScript file is not actually being executed anymore. And you may be wondering why all the styling and everything has also disappeared. Now, inside this index.js, we're also including our style sheet, and then we're injecting this JavaScript basics, the name of this course, into our HTML document. So in the event that somebody does have JavaScript disabled, it may be an idea that we want to just let them know. Now for this, we use something called a no script tag. So we could then say, and we can actually put valid HTML inside of here, and we might want to say something to the user. For instance, we can say your JavaScript is disabled. Now what we'll have to do, because this is monitoring for JavaScript changes, we'll just have to manually refresh, and you can see your JavaScript is disabled. Now, if we were to go back to our settings and re-enable JavaScript, this message would disappear, and we would then again see that JavaScript content which we have already set up inside index.js. Now for this, what I'm going to do is just revert this to our generic script tag. Instead of no script, you know that no script's available, and we'll leave it with just our hello world console log. In the next video, we're going to be discussing variables, how var, let, and const work, and this kind of gives you the big building blocks of what we need to get started with learning JavaScript.